Welcome to Reform Thinking. I'm so glad you're joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. We have a really fascinating deep dive lined up for you.
We really do. And I actually want you to try a quick thought experiment with me right off the bat.
Oh, I love these.
Right. So wherever you are right now, like whether you're driving, doing the dishes, walking the dog, whatever, I want you to just form your mouth and make a very specific sound.
Out loud.
Yeah. Out loud if you can. It's just 2 syllables. It sounds like this. Môrah.
Môrah.
Exactly. Go ahead and say it, wherever you're listening. Môrah. Now, if I were to ask you what that single phonetic breath means, you'd probably just assume it has one specific definition, right?
I mean, that's how English works for the most part.
Exactly. But what if I told you that depending on who is speaking, when they lived, and what random margin note a medieval scribe happened to leave on a piece of parchment, that exact same sound translates into 4 completely different things?
And we should clarify, we are not talking about subtle variations of the same word here.
No, not at all.
We are talking about wildly different categories of human experience.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing. We are talking about a physical, heavy metal shaving razor.
Okay.
We're talking about a devastating, life-altering autumn rainstorm.
Wow.
We're talking about the abstract concept of sheer, awe-inspiring terror. And finally, a master teacher.
It sounds like a riddle.
It totally does. How does the exact same ancient sound translate into those 4 totally distinct realities? So today, for this deep dive, we are opening up a stack of highly technical ancient lexicons to find out.
Which, I have to admit, is a bit of a departure from our usual format.
Yeah, it is.
Normally, we're looking at long-form narrative articles or historical biographies, exploring theology through those lenses. But today, the source stack is entirely linguistic.
Very technical stuff.
Yeah, we're diving into the hidden mechanics of translation.
So for the listener who might be feeling a little intimidated by that, who might be thinking, I don't know the first thing about ancient Hebrew or linguistics, why should they stick around for this?
Well, because this will fundamentally change how you interact with any text you read in translation for the rest of your life.
That's a big promise.
It is, but it's true. When we read ancient text, whether it's classical literature, historical documents, or the biblical text, we tend to look at the English words on the page and just assume a one-to-one equivalence.
Right, like it's a simple math equation.
Exactly. We assume that thousands of years ago, someone had a concept in their head, they wrote down a word for it, and the modern translator simply swapped it out for the matching English word.
Just dragged and dropped it.
Yeah, but that is a complete illusion. Today, we're going to totally expose that illusion.
I love that.
We're going to look at the layers of intense scholarly debate, centuries of preserved history, and just the vibrant physical culture of the ancient Near East, all hiding beneath a single translated English word.
It's going to be so good. So we're taking this phonetic cluster, the root sounds morah and moreh, and we are going to trace it through our source material today.
Let's do it.
Let's start with the first entry in our lexicon stack. The scholars categorize this as Roman numeral 1, morah.
Right, the first definition.
Yeah. And right off the bat, the sources direct us to the ancient root word, which is marah. And that root means to stroke or to sweep away.
To stroke, okay.
Right. And from that root action, the lexicon defines this word as a very specific physical tool, specifically a shearing knife, a shaving tool, or a razor.
The physical specificity here is what I find so compelling.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources reference a categorization system, specifically lexeme semantic domains, or LN numbers, for those who nerd out on this stuff.
Right, which groups words by concept rather than just alphabetical order.
Exactly. And under this domain, the scholars suggest we are looking at a metal implement, something knife-like. They even suggest it likely had an elongated end and a handle.
Okay, I have to stop you right there because that sounds incredibly confident.
It does, yeah.
We are talking about a tool from the Bronze or early Iron Age. And the scholars are somehow suggesting the literal shape of the handle based on a root word that means to stroke.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a leap.
Are they just guessing? Or is there a real mechanism behind how they reconstruct a physical object from a 3,000-year-old text?
Well, it's a mixture of etymology and comparative archaeology. So the root morah gives us the action.
Okay.
It's not a chopping motion. It's a smooth, continuous stroking or sweeping motion across a surface.
Like sweeping across skin.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And when you combine that linguistic clue with the archaeological reality of what grooming tools actually looked like in the ancient Near East.
Which we have dug up, right?
Yeah, we have found them. They're often single-cast bronze or iron blades with a distinct tang or handle that allows for that sweeping motion. So you start to build a very specific profile of the object.
That makes a lot of sense. And the sources show that this specific object only appears in a very narrow, highly localized context in the text.
Very specific context, yes.
It shows up in Judges 13.5 and 16.17, which is the famous story of Samson.
Right, Samson and Delilah.
Exactly. And then again in 1 Samuel 1.11, dealing with the prophet Samuel.
And both of those instances revolve around one of the most intense, severe commitments a person could make in ancient Israel, which is the vow of the Nazarite.
Right. The sources explicitly link this word, this morah, to the strict oath formula of this vow. The phrase is, quote, "A razor shall not come upon his head."
Right.
But let's bring the listener into the cultural reality of this for a second. Why is this specific tool, this morah, the absolute focal point of the vow?
Well, in the ancient Near East, hair was deeply symbolic.
In what way?
It represented vitality,
Yeah.
life force, and just unrestrained natural growth. To let your hair grow wild was to signal to the entire community that you had removed yourself from the normal, domesticated routines of society.
Like you were stepping out of normal civilization.
Exactly. You were set apart, consecrated entirely to a divine purpose. So the morah, this physical metal instrument of civilization and grooming it, became the ultimate symbol of breaking that consecration.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about getting a haircut.
No, not at all. If the morah touched the head, the vow was shattered, the sacred status was swept away, just as that root word implies.
Which makes the physical object itself feel almost, I don't know, charged with danger. Like it's a profane thing.
It really was.
But here's the part of the source material that completely threw me, and I need you to unpack this for me.
Okay, let's hear it.
The sources provide the Greek equivalent from the Septuagint. And for the listener who might need a quick refresher, the Septuagint is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew texts.
Right. Created by Jewish scholars in Alexandria around the 3rd century BC, often abbreviated as the LXX in our source notes.
Yeah, the LXX. So when those ancient Greek translators looked at this highly specific, culturally charged Hebrew grooming tool, this morah, they translated it into Greek as sideros.
Right. Cedar.
And the sources note that sideros just means iron or metal.
Just a generic material.
That's it. Why? Like, why does the Hebrew lexicon work so hard to visualize this tool with precision? You know, the root action of stroking, the elongated handle, the specific cultural taboo, while the ancient Greek translators just shrugged and called it a piece of metal.
It seems lazy, doesn't it?
Yeah. Did they just forget what the tool looked like?
Well, they didn't forget, but they were translating across a massive cultural and technological divide. You really have to put yourself in the shoes of a Jewish scholar living in Hellenistic Alexandria in, say, 250 BC.
Okay, so I'm in Egypt.
Right. You are living in a cosmopolitan Greek-speaking metropolis. The ancient rustic world of the early Israelite judges, where a specific type of bronze or early iron shearing knife was the ultimate symbol of a desert ascetic's vow that whirled is centuries in the rearview mirror.
Wow. So the physical reality of the tool is already just feeding into history.
The specific physical reality, yes.
Yeah.
And furthermore, you were translating a Semitic language into an Indo-European one.
Right. Which work very differently.
Very differently. Ancient Hebrew is incredibly concrete. It's tied to physical actions, like stroking or sweeping or throwing. Greek, on the other hand, often moves toward the conceptual or the material essence of a thing.
Ah, okay.
By using sideros, which means iron, the translators are communicating the material prohibition of the vow. Basically, no iron shall touch his head.
Meaning no human manufactured tool shall interfere with his divine consecration.
Exactly.
But in doing so, they completely flatten the object. Like, they lose the object itself.
They do. They lose the specific shape, the tactile sense of the tool in the hand, the unique cultural memory of the morah.
I was thinking about this, and imagine you're an archaeologist, like 1,000 years from now.
Okay.
And you find a document talking about someone staring at their smartphone all day. But the translator of that document, lacking our cultural context, just translates it into a future language as a block of glass and rare earth metals.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
Right, because it is technically accurate. The material is correct.
Right.
But you have lost the entire cultural weight of what the object actually did, how it lit up, how it connected people, how it felt in the hand.
That is exactly what happens.
Yeah.
Translation inherently involves loss. The shift from a highly specific Hebrew grooming tool to a generic Greek material demonstrates how translations sometimes flatten the distinct, sharp realities of the ancient world into broader, blunter concepts.
And we are just talking about a physical piece of metal here, like a tool you can hold. But things get infinitely more complicated when the translators are looking at a word and they have to decide between a physical object and an abstract concept.
Most definitely.
Because as we move to the next section of the source stack, we encounter a situation where the ancient scribes themselves weren't entirely sure what a word in the text was supposed to mean.
And this brings us to a massive, centuries-long debate surrounding Psalm 9, verse 21.
Yes, let's set the stage for this. The sources categorize our second word as Roman numeral 2 to morah, and they note it appears in Psalm 9.21. Now, the context of the psalm is David asking God to deal with the nations, right? The enemies of Israel.
Right, he's crying out for divine justice.
Exactly. But the text presents a glaring historical puzzle. If you look at the raw Hebrew consonants, the text essentially says to God, appoint or set a morah for the nations.
Which, if we follow the definition we literally just established, means David is asking God to appoint a giant metal shaving razor over the nations.
Which obviously makes zero sense.
None at all.
And the sources point out that the ancient scribes knew this didn't make sense. To explain how they dealt with it, the sources introduced two vital linguistic concepts. And these are the hotiv and the korah.
Oh, this is the best part.
I really want to spend some time here, because this blew my mind when I realized how this ancient system worked.
It is honestly one of the most fascinating aspects of textual transmission in human history.
So the dative is an Aramaic term that literally means, quote, what is written.
What is written, right?
It refers to the physical ink on the parchment, the actual consonants written in the main body of the ancient scroll. And in Psalm 9.21, the kentiv, the actual ink on the page, spells morah, memen, vav, resh, he.
The exact same spelling as our razor from the Samson story.
Right. But the scribes who copied these texts, specifically a group known as the Masoretes, working in the early Middle Ages, they were faced with a massive theological dilemma.
Because they received these ancient scrolls that had been passed down for centuries. And they believed these scrolls were the sacred, inspired, perfectly preserved Word of God.
Which is a very high view of Scripture.
Very high. But they also had eyes.
Right.
They could see what looked like obvious scribal errors, typos that had crept in over hundreds of years of hand copying.
Like maybe a scribe back in 400 BC was just tired, or the guy dictating the text mumbled and they just wrote down the wrong letter.
Exactly. But the Masoretes had such a profound reverence for the physical text that they absolutely refused to alter the dative.
They wouldn't touch it.
They would not scratch out the consonants. They would not erase the ink. The text they received was the text they would pass on, flaws and all.
So, how do you fix an error that you are religiously forbidden from deleting?
You invent the koi.
The quer.
Yes.
Hmm.
The koi means what is read. It was a marginal notation system. The scribes would leave the problematic word untouched in the main text, but in the margin, they would write the consonants of the word they believed was supposed to be there.
Ah, okay.
Instructing the reader on how to pronounce it out loud when reading in the synagogue.
It is essentially a 3,000-year-old autocorrect system.
That's a great way to put it.
But it's an autocorrect where they refuse to actually apply the fix to the document itself. They just put a little sticky note on the side saying, hey, we know this says razor, but please read it as something else.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. It is an autocorrect that preserves the original typo out of sheer theological reverence for God's word.
So what is the kri in the margin for Psalm 9.21? The sources say the scribes suggested reading it as morah, so they swapped the final letter, changing the Hebrew letter he to an aleph.
And we should definitely explain why that specific error probably happened in the first place.
Please do.
Both he and aleph are guttural letters in Hebrew. At the end of a word, they're often practically silent, or they just elongate the vowel. So morah and morah sound almost identical when spoken aloud.
Like morah and moab.
Exactly. It is the easiest mistake in the world for a scribe taking dictation to make.
But the shift in meaning is just monumental. By changing that one silent letter, the word no longer means razor. The sources define this new word, morah, as terror, fear, or some awe-inspiring exhibition of power.
Which completely changes the theology of the verse.
Totally.
If you read the Kri, David is asking God to appoint terror over the nations, that the nations may know themselves to be but men.
And wait, let me get this straight. How does the etymology work there? We established that the root for the razor means to stroke or to sweep away. Does the word for terror come from the same root? Like God is sweeping away the nations, which causes terror.
It's a good guess, but no.
Or is it a totally different root that just happens to sound the same?
That is a crucial question. The word morah, meaning terror, comes from a completely different root. It comes from yara, which simply means to fear or to be afraid.
Oh, I see.
So this isn't a metaphorical evolution where a razor becomes scary over time. It is a true homophone situation. Two completely different roots evolving into words that sounded identical to the ancient ear, leading to a literal scribal collision on the parchment.
Okay, that makes so much sense. So we have the text saying razor, the margin saying terror, but the sources don't stop there.
No, they do not.
And this is where I have to just push back on the idea that translation is a clean science, because the source stack introduces complete chaos at this point.
The alternative manuscript.
Yes, the alternative manuscripts. The sources note that some ancient manuscripts completely ignore the razor and the terror and suggest the word should be arah,
Right.
which means a curse. So appoint a curse over the nations.
Okay.
But then the Greek Septuagint, our translators down in Alexandria, they go off in a completely different direction. They look at this Hebrew word and they suggest reading it as moreh,
Moreh.
which translates to a teacher or a master. And the Greek word they chose to represent that is nomotheton, meaning lawgiver.
Which introduces a massive interpretive fork in the road for anyone trying to read this psalm.
Massive doesn't even begin to cover it. I mean,
Yeah.
put yourself in the shoes of a modern Bible translator sitting in a committee room today. You have to pick one English word to print on the page.
It's a heavy responsibility.
There is a colossal difference between asking God to appoint terror over the nations versus appointing a teacher or a lawgiver over them.
Let's unpack the implications of that choice because it's deeply theological.
Yeah, let's do it.
If you choose the marginal note, morah terror, you are interpreting the psalm as a plea for overwhelming, fearful domination. David is essentially saying, God, these foreign nations are arrogant. Put them in their place with an awe-inspiring exhibition of power so terrifying that they realize their own fragile mortality.
So it is a plea for subjugation.
Precisely. It's a reminder of total human depravity and fragility in the face of a sovereign God. But if you follow the Greek tradition and read it as moreh, teacher or lawgiver, the entire posture of the psalm shifts.
How so?
It becomes a plea for enlightenment. David is saying, God, these nations are acting terribly because they lack divine law. Appoint a master teacher over them. Give them the law, so that through instruction, they might realize their human limitations.
Wow. So one is asking God to be a conquering warrior, and the other is asking God to be a strict but benevolent headmaster.
Yes.
How do translators possibly choose between those two?
Well, they have to look at the broader context of the psalm, the surrounding verses, the historical theology of ancient Israel, and the reliability of the different manuscript traditions.
That's a lot of variables.
Most modern English translations go with terror because the Rui tradition of the Masoretes is highly respected, and a plea for judgment just fits the generally militant tone of Psalm 9.
Right.
But the fact that the Septuagint chose lawgiver proves that in the ancient world, the text was fluid, and the concept of divine instruction was seen as a totally viable solution to the arrogance of nations.
And this debate perfectly sets up the third major section of our source stack, because this alternative reading morah, the teacher or lawgiver, is inextricably linked in the ancient Hebrew mind to something entirely unexpected.
We are taking a big turn here.
We really are. We are moving from grooming tools and sheer terror to the weather.
And this is where the linguistic poetry of the ancient Near East really comes alive for me.
The sources categorize our next words as morah 2 and morah 3. And I read the section of lexicon like 3 times because I couldn't quite believe the connection.
Wow.
The exact same phonetic word used for a master Peter Morah is also the precise word used for the early rain.
It is a breathtaking connection. But to really understand it, we have to look at the root word and we have to look at the dirt.
Okay, let's start with the dirt.
Good place to start.
The sources specify that morah 2 isn't just any rain. It is specifically the early rain that falls from late October to late December in the Levant.
Very specific time frame.
Yeah, it appears in the book of Joel, chapter 2, verse 23, where it talks about the early rain and the rain and latter rain. It also appears in Psalm 84.7. So why is a specific season of rain given this unique title?
To understand this, you really have to place yourself in the physical geography and climate of ancient Israel.
Okay.
It is a totally agrarian society whose entire existence is dictated by a brutal, unforgiving climate cycle. They do not have year-round rain like we might be used to.
Right.
They have 2 main seasons, a long, completely dry, blistering summer that stretches from May to October, and a rainy winter.
So by the time October rolls around, the ground has been baking in the Middle Eastern sun for 6 straight months.
It is baked as hard as concrete. I mean, you literally cannot plow it. If you try to drag a wooden plow through that soil, the plow will just shatter.
Wow.
The entire agricultural cycle is essentially frozen, waiting for a singular event, the breaking of the drought. The very survival of the society, whether they will eat or starve the following year, depends absolutely on the arrival of the early autumn rains. That life-giving, drought-breaking rain is the morah.
Okay, so the rain is vital, life or death.
Yes.
But how does that connect to morah 3, which the lexicon defines as a master teacher, like a person who instructs others by imparting skills or knowledge as an occupation?
Right.
This shows up in Isaiah 30.20, Proverbs 5.3, and in Job 36.22, which asks the powerful question, who is a teacher like him?
Referring to God.
Right. So are these two concepts sharing the same word just by coincidence, or is there an actual mechanical link between the rain and a teacher?
There is a profound mechanical and etymological link. Both the rain and the teacher come from the Hebrew root yara, and this root originally meant to throw, to cast, or to shoot, like shooting an arrow in a specific direction.
Wait, shooting arrows?
Yes, shooting arrows, but watch how the metaphor evolves over time.
Okay.
Shooting arrows gives you the concept of directing something with purpose toward a target. When applied to water, it becomes the shooting or casting down of the heavy autumn raindrops that penetrate the hard soil.
Like arrows of water hitting the dirt.
Exactly. And when applied to human communication, it becomes the directing or pointing of a student toward the truth. It is the casting of knowledge into a hard, unplowed mind.
That is incredible. So the rain softens the physical soil so seeds can grow, and the teacher softens the mental soil so wisdom can grow.
Exactly. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But it goes even deeper than that, and we see this reflected in the, frankly, bizarre choices made by the Greek translators.
Right. I really want to bring up the Greek translations provided in the text here because they are all over the map.
They really are.
For the verses talking about rain, the Septuagint sometimes uses the logical word, which is proimos, meaning early rain.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. But strangely, it also translates the Hebrew word for rain as brumma, which means food.
Food, yeah.
And even more bizarrely, and this ties back to our Psalm 9 debate, it translates the word for rain as nomathetos, which means lawgiver.
Which just seems insane to a modern reader. I mean, how does weather become legislation?
I tried to puzzle this out when I was reading this stack. Is it because in an agrarian society, the late October rains literally dictated the laws of survival?
What do you mean?
Well, like, if that rain doesn't fall, the rules of the whole society have to change. Debts can't be paid, land can't be worked, mass migration might have to happen. Is that why they called the rain a lawgiver?
Yeah.
Because it governs what you can do?
You are tracking the exact logic of the ancient mind there. The morah establishes order. It dictates when humanity must act, when to plow, when to plant. In a world without weather apps or central irrigation, the early rain is the ultimate sovereign authority over the land.
The lawgiver of nature.
Yes. And because that rain is the only guarantee of a future harvest, translating it as Brahmsha food is a poetic but intensely practical leap. The rain is the literal promise of food.
And this brings us to a fascinating parallel with the word for teacher. Because if the early rain is a lawgiver that establishes order and brings life-giving authority, then a master teacher in this culture isn't just someone conveying raw facts.
Not at all. In the ancient Near East, a master teacher, a morah, is an authoritative figure who imparts life-giving structure. Fun fact, the word Torah, which we often translate as law, comes from the exact same root, yara.
Wait, really?
Yes, it means teaching or instruction. The teacher brings the moral and practical framework that allows human society to flourish, just as the rain brings the framework for the crops to flourish. Both establish order, both bring growth. They are both life-giving authorities.
But the sources also reveal a totally dark side to this authority, and I think this is one of the most compelling insights in the entire stack.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
When looking at the verses about the master teacher, the Greek translation uses paidush, meaning to instruct, which again makes total sense.
Right.
But shockingly, the sources note that the Greek also translates the word for teacher as planash, which means to lead astray.
Which feels like the exact opposite of life-giving instruction.
Right. If a teacher is supposed to be like the refreshing autumn rain, how do they become someone who leads you astray?
because the ancient translators understood the inherent danger of authority and, honestly, the flawed nature of humanity.
Unpack that.
Well, the root yara means to direct or to point. A master teacher holds immense power. They have the ability to shape reality for their students, to soften the soil of a disciple's intellect and plant seeds there. But human beings are fallible and often corrupt. What if the teacher points in the wrong direction?
If they are the one casting the arrows of knowledge, they can just cast them at the wrong target.
Precisely. A master teacher has the capacity to guide you toward truth and life, but they equally have the dangerous power to manipulate, to deceive, and to lead you into absolute ruin. The translators recognize that the role of the morah carries this dual potential for great good and great harm.
That is so sobering.
When you submit to a human teacher, you're giving them the power to planash, to lead you astray.
Which casts a completely different light on that question in Job 36.22. Who is a teacher like him?
Yeah, referencing God.
Right. Reading it through this lens, it isn't just asking who is as smart as God. It is asking who is a teacher whose instruction is as reliable, as life-giving, and as completely free from corruption as the divine.
Exactly.
You can trust the divine teacher not to manipulate the target.
It is a profound statement of trust. Human teachers might use their authority to lead you astray because of their own flawed nature. But the divine teacher acts like the true early rain, bringing only what is necessary for life and perfect order.
We have journeyed from a physical bronze grooming tool to a scribal autocorrect preserving the terror of divine judgment, to the life-giving autumn rains, and into the complex, dangerous authority of a master teacher.
It's a wild ride.
The fact that a single phonetic breath, morah, can carry all of that weight is just astounding.
It really demonstrates the incredible density of ancient languages.
So let's pivot to the final segment of our source stack, which anchors this word geographically and gives us a window into how modern scholars attempt to basically wrangle all of this complexity.
The geographical connection is quite subtle but very revealing, I think.
The sources briefly mention Môrah 4 as a place name, Môrah.
Right.
This shows up in Genesis with Abraham at the, quote, oak of Moreh near Shechem, and also in Judges 7.1 at the hill of Morah. Interestingly, the sources note that the Greek translates this place name as hypsalos, meaning high.
Oh, yeah.
The sources also tie in a very famous related word here, which is Moriah, or Moriah.
As in Mount Moriah.
Right, from 2 Chronicles 3.1, the mountain where Solomon built the temple. So why do you think the Greek translators associated the name Môrah with a high place?
Well, my question back to you is, do you think it's just topographical?
See, my initial thought was just topographical, like maybe the hill of Môrah was literally just a tall hill.
Sure, that's the most literal reading.
But based on everything we just discussed, is there a deeper connection between the concept of a teacher, the rain, and high places?
There absolutely is. Think about how teaching happened in the ancient world. An authoritative teacher didn't sit in a sunken pit.
No.
They sat in an elevated position or on a hill to cast their voice down over the disciples. The Sermon on the Mount is a classic example of this motif.
Oh, wow. Right.
Furthermore, where does the rain strike first? Where do the clouds gather?
Around the mountains.
Around the high places, exactly.
Yeah.
A high place is geographically suited to receive the morah, the rain, and socially suited to deliver the morah, the teaching. The geography itself reinforces the linguistic concepts.
The layers just keep unfolding. It's endless. But what really dominates this final section of the sources isn't actually the geography.
No, it's not.
It is the sheer, overwhelming scholarly weight attached to figuring all of this out. Just for 2 verses in the Bible, Joel 2.23, the verse about the rain, and Psalm 9.21, the verse about terror, or the teacher, the source material provides an exhaustive bibliography of commentary articles.
And this isn't just a list of names for extra reading. It is a map of intellectual battlegrounds.
Exactly. I want to highlight the mechanics of this debate because it really shows how the sausage gets made.
Let's do it.
On one hand, the sources list Mitchell Dayhood's work on the Psalms in the Anchor-Yale Bible Commentary.
Right, a massive scholarly work.
And on the other hand, we have scholars like James Crenshaw working on Joel, or the massive team behind the Expositor's Bible Commentary. Why are there so many scholars arguing across so many volumes about a single word? What are they actually debating?
They are debating methodology. They are debating how we're supposed to discover the meaning of a word when the original speakers have been dead for 3 millennia.
Give me an example of that. How would Dahood approach this differently than the others?
Well, Mitchell Dayhood was famous and honestly somewhat controversial for relying heavily on Ugaritic.
Ugaritic.
Yes, Ugaritic is an ancient Northwest Semitic language. It's essentially a sister language to Biblical Hebrew, and it was discovered on clay tablets in Syria in the 1920s.
Okay, so it's a related ancient language.
Exactly. And Davenant believes that to understand obscure Hebrew words, you had to look outside the Bible to these older neighboring languages. So when he looks at a difficult word in the Psalms, he might suggest a translation based on how a similar root was used in an ancient Canaanite myth about the rain god Baal.
Which opens up entirely new semantic possibilities, but also kind of takes you away from the biblical text itself.
Right. And scholars on the other side of the methodological divide, perhaps someone like Crenshaw or the more traditional grammarians, would push back fiercely against that.
What would they say?
They argue for internal contextual criticism. They would say, we shouldn't be defining Israelite theology based on Canaanite clay tablets. We need to look at how the word is used elsewhere in the biblical canon, look at the Masoretic marginal notes, and trust the internal grammar and the theological consistency of the text itself.
So when I sit down and read my English Bible, and I see the word terror instead of teacher, I am completely oblivious to the fact that two PhDs might have spent a decade arguing about Canaanite clay tablets versus medieval Aramaic margin notes, just to choose that one word.
You are entirely oblivious to it, which is kind of the paradox of modern translation.
It really is.
A good translation reads smoothly, hiding the labor. But that smoothness can create a false sense of certainty. When you realize that reading these texts requires examining the geography of the Levant, the agricultural calendar of the Iron Age, the homophones of medieval scribes, and the philosophical biases of Greek translators in Alexandria, you realize that translation is not a math equation. It is an incredibly fragile, highly complex, interpretive art form.
So I have a question for you then. Does that fragility bother you? Does it make you trust translated texts less?
Actually, it does the exact opposite for me. I find the scholarly weight immensely comforting.
Why? If they are constantly arguing and the data is incomplete, why is that comforting?
Because it reveals that reading these texts is not a solitary act of hubris. It is a cross-generational, cross-cultural, communal effort. Scholars aren't just sitting in a room flipping a coin.
Right.
They are employing rigorous, transparent methodologies to synthesize history, linguistics, and archaeology. When you read a translation, you are not reading one person's guess. You're standing on the shoulders of centuries of meticulous, passionate, agonizing debate about how best to honor and preserve the ancient voices. It points to a profound reverence for the text.
That is a beautiful way to frame it. I mean, it just changes everything. Let's step back and summarize this deep dive because we have covered an immense amount of territory today.
We really have.
We started with a physical, tangible object, a metal razor, the morah, wielded in the time of Samson. A tool so embedded in the cultural taboo of the Nazarite vow that its specific nature was eventually flattened into generic metal by Greek translators living in a totally different world.
Right. And from there, we navigated the intense textual ambiguity of Psalm 9, discovering the brilliant, reverent autocorrect of the cautive and Côrah.
The sticky notes in the margins.
Exactly, where scribes wrestled with homophones to decide between appointing an awe-inspiring terror or a master teacher over the arrogant nations.
Then we explored the deep etymological root of yara, discovering the beautiful, deeply practical, poetic link in the ancient agrarian mind between the life-giving early autumn rains that break the summer drought and the authoritative, potentially dangerous instruction of a teacher who breaks the drought of ignorance.
And finally, we honored the massive collaborative scholarly effort required to translate it all, parsing the methodological debates between ancient Near Eastern comparativists and internal textual critics.
And for you, the listener, this is the main takeaway. The next time you sit down to read a translated text, whether it is a religious document, an ancient poem, or a piece of classical literature, I want you to remember this lexicon stack.
Keep it in the back of your mind.
Yeah. I want you to remember that the smooth English text on the page is an illusion. You are looking at the surface of a deep, turbulent ocean. Beneath every single word is an immense depth of debate, centuries of preserved history, and the rich, dirt under the fingernails physical culture of people who lived thousands of years ago.
The text is a living, breathing artifact.
It really is. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We spent this entire deep dive dissecting how ancient people used one phonetic sound, morah, to capture the sharp cutting of a razor, the life-saving arrival of autumn rain, the terror of absolute power, and the wisdom of a master teacher.
A web of meaning we can barely replicate in English.
Exactly. So my question to you is this. If their ancient language was capable of weaving the physical climate, human tools, emotional terror, and intellectual authority into a single breath, how much richness, nuance, and sheer poetry are we missing in our everyday modern communication by expecting our words to only ever mean one flat, literal thing?
Wow, makes you want to choose your words a little more
It
carefully.
really does. Thanks for taking the plunge with us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.